We're now going to recommence with the panel on customer engagement issues, which will be led by Luann Shearer. Thank you very much.
Is this? Oh, good. Good afternoon, Chair Zibelman and Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to report on the work of the Customer Engagement Committee of Working Group 1. I want to first thank my co-chairs who are at the resource table, Alana Mikulchevsky from Central Hudson and John Williams from NYSERDA. I also want to thank RMI for sharing their insights and helping us make contact with the right people to discuss customer engagement. I must thank the committee, which is comprised of 158 individuals from 90 organizations representing utilities, ESCOs, government, customers, aggregators, behavioral science experts, business, consumer environmental advocates, energy efficiency providers, energy demand response and smart grid trade associations, nonprofit research institutions, real estate boards and companies, and solar and technology providers. Finally, I especially want to thank the staff team who has done a tremendous job, and they haven't gotten the judge's memo because they refuse to stop working on this. They're continuing to do research and scheduling meetings with experts on specific topics regarding customer engagement. The CEC's first task was to create an objective, which is to identify barriers to participation by all customer groups in the new markets and opportunities created by the REV initiative, and to identify and recommend solutions where appropriate. The committee spent a great deal of time identifying and discussing barriers. A list of over 100 barriers is included in the report that was filed in the REV case on Tuesday. I want to note that not all of the CEC members agreed that all the barriers were barriers. Jay Brew, the Managing Director of Brickfield, Burchett, Ritz & Stone PC, is here today to talk about barriers to customer participation. And Chris Kelleher, Senior Director, Government and Regulatory Affairs for Direct Energy, will talk about barriers to ESCO participation. The staff arm of the CEC also requested that the members provide any reports, studies, or documents that provide examples of effective customer engagement. We received many documents. Some were summarized in the report, others we are still going through. Cameron Brooks, President of Tolerable Planet Enterprises, will present on customer engagement. Most recently, the CEC spent time in conversations with experts in community choice aggregation, or CCA. CCA is an energy procurement model that enables local governments to aggregate the electric and/or gas load of their residents, business, and institutions in order to purchase electricity and/or gas on their behalf. Brian Murphy, President and co-founder of Colonial Power Group, Inc., is here to talk about CCA. With that, I would like to introduce Jay Brew.
Thank you, Luann. Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, Commissioners. I'd like to congratulate everybody for making it back from lunch. I am Jay Brew. I'm here for all customers, but I represent Nucor Steel Auburn. And I'd like to offer the usual disclaimer. These presentation materials don't represent Nucor's views or any customers in particular, or is necessarily a consensus of stakeholders, but represent sort of the current state of the work in progress.
If you could just get the microphone more directly in front of you. You only have about 4 inches to work with. So
is that better?
Much better.
Thank you
very much.
First, I would like to start very briefly with Nucor, because Nucor is the most motivated DER customer you would hope to find on the system. Nucor recycles about 1 billion pounds of steel a year in an electric arc furnace outside of Syracuse. We use hundreds of millions of kilowatt hours a year, and we're propelled by international competitive forces for our products. That means from an energy efficiency standpoint, every member of the Nucor team is working to do as much as we can to improve the process. From a distributed generation perspective, we often consider CHP and other options that people propose for us, and we would consider anything and everything up into a battalion of squirrels on treadmills if we thought it would be cost effective. Moving on here, while Nucor is very strongly motivated, and there are other large commercial industrial customers that are also motivated for their own reasons to do DER, We recognize that there are barriers to things that they could do additionally, as well as the challenge of motivating customers that aren't driven by those own internal pressures, and that's really what we wanted to talk about. The discussion that follows really focuses primarily on barriers, but we thought we'd start with some constructive principles going forward. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on them, but first, it's in order to get the animation of markets and customer participation that you want, which is really ultimately what this is all about, you need to offer products that customers want. We have to address the basic pricing problems, cost allocation, and those are certainly brought up in marketing, pricing, and the other groups. I don't want to spend time on them. But the basics are that for customers to really embrace this initiative, they have to see the value proposition. It's got to make sense for them. And along those lines, I wanted to offer two quick examples of things that have worked and things that haven't from historic practice. Nucor, like many large industrials, operates under interruptible rates. They've been negotiated between the utilities and the user that reflects a meeting of the minds over what the utility wanted and what the customer could do. And those arrangements, because they've aligned the customer interests with the utility's interests, many of them have been in place for many years. They've been sustainable. In contrast, and I want to take an example that did not pick on anybody from New York, in the 1990s, Florida Power and Light introduced a real-time pricing rate that had a baseline that was designed to be revenue neutral for the utility, and to the extent the customer made modifications to its load shape in response to real-time prices, they had a ratchet where they would adjust the baseline to recapture it. The result was, over 6 years, or thereabouts, one customer signed up for it, quickly realized it was a mistake, and got off as quickly as they could. So to the extent that you're trying to animate the markets and get customers engaged, you have to actually come up with products and services that they will want. Moving on, and in the interest of violating almost every rule on PowerPoint presentations, we put most of the barriers on one slide.
This is all about breaking rules.
That's right. Changing the way things are done. The first is an obvious one, which is we are talking about product innovation and services that assume smartphones when you are looking at metering and billing that predates 8-track tapes. And so certainly a basic function here is, from the customer's perspective, of better access to the information that is expected to drive their behavior compared to what you have now, which are meter reads for many customers that are not only not monthly, but might be bi-monthly or worse. You have the whole problem of understanding the electric system and electric tariffs. While everybody understands that when your parents yelled at you to turn off the light in your room, you were saving energy, it is certainly more complicated than that. And understanding how the process works in a way that makes sense to consumers is important. From the regulatory perspective, and we will talk in a minute about demand response programs and the NYSO and product flexibility, but that is certainly one of the things that should be focused on most directly. The cost of participating with the DSPP and value-added products and services has to be addressed. It is certainly no surprise that the cost of metering, developing platforms, and so forth are going to cost money that ratepayers are going to be asked to share the burden, carry forward on. Also, difficulty in understanding time of use rates, which vary widely all over the place, is important. And on the distributed generation side, certainly the current state of standby tariffs, and this does not represent by any means consensus among the group, because there was certainly as many members that felt that standby rates are fine as those that felt that they needed to be changed substantially and updated, as well as emissions, particularly in urban areas where the permitting requirements may be an important factor. And then you have a whole set of equity and fairness considerations, low-income social justice issues, all of which, to me, comes back to basic appropriate cost allocation and rate making. There are many customers like Nucor that are highly motivated. There are other folks, maybe neighborhoods in the Slingerlands, that might want to do a microgrid. But you are going to have customers that, for economic, logistical, or practical reasons, are not going to be implementing many of the DR measures that you'll be considering, and making sure that the folks that really cannot take advantage of DR opportunities being asked to bear an unfair burden is going to be a basic discussion all the way through this process. With respect to demand response specifically, and I know you talked briefly with Molly Lampe about where things are with Order 7045 and the demand response compensation rule, but I would want to point out that in 2001, this commission told its utilities to cancel its interruptible rates and adopt the demand response programs implemented by the NYSO. Those programs are primarily reliability driven and are designed for demand response to try to mimic the operating characteristics of generators. Well, most loads don't have load shapes that mimic the operating characteristics of generators. And that was really one of the things that we think is important, which is responsive demand is not the same as demand response. A quick example on the industrial interruptible side is that I've seen through the years in different states all manner of arrangements to mitigate peaks. Customers that agreed to shut down on Tuesdays in the summertime, do their maintenance then. Customers that were predominantly off-peak and committed to maintaining a certain off-peak ratio. Customers that looked like generators and agreed to curtail on 5 minutes notice for less than an hour to the extent that a utility had a contingency event. The point simply is that there are all kinds of opportunities for different product differentiation where the customer can look at its load shape and what it's capable of doing as opposed to trying to simply work within the confines of the NYSO generated products. And there was a lot of discussion within the committee on the NYSO DR program, and my point is not to critique that so much as to say that from the DSPP perspective, to the extent that one of your core objective is addressing system efficiency and load factors, it can be addressed in many, many different ways than simply those identified capacity, ancillary services, and energy products. And with that, that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. I just have one question to begin with, and maybe Chris is going to address this as well, so I'll just lay it out there. I mean, one of the things that, in thinking about this issue that we've been, and I think it's reflected in the staff's report as well, we are in a position that, unlike the unbundling of the wholesale market, the success of what we do in REV is largely dependent on animating a yet to be animated sector of the industry, i.e. the consumer. And I think for the most part, when we think about these, one is, I think you just brought this up, is we're thinking a lot in terms of the mass market because, as the Commission has identified in its ESCO proceeding, we're seeing that there's a lag in the mass market compared to the commercial industrial. So I guess one is a point. I'm appreciative of you bringing it up because I think that the commercial industrial market has a lot to offer and a lot of value that can be driven by recognizing how they can participate and assist the system in making it more resilient, also making it more efficient. I think one is I do think it's important that we keep in mind that these sectors, that there may not be a need for much animation, but maybe more recognition and a value add. And that's what I sort of took as your statement there.
That and the fact that there are all kinds of product opportunities that can be defined differently.
Right. But the other point, I guess, is what you're making, and as a question I have for the group, and you can answer it, and then maybe others can answer it too. Part of the issue is that if we, do the Steve Jobs type analogy and we say, well, nobody really wanted an iPhone until I created an iPhone, is that how much of this is like, how do we get a pull? Because if you ask most mass market and you want to be somewhat jaded in your utility view, most times, people will say all customers really want is cost-effective, reliable electric service. They don't, it's cold beer and warm cookies or something. But I think that, while I think that's true, that there's a sense, but I don't think there's a sense, isn't it, that actually in offered products, if somebody offered you something that you as an industrial consumer and said, hey, I will value this, wouldn't you change your methodology to get there? I mean, there is an element of how do we create a pull as opposed to thinking about it always as a push, right?
Well, strictly from my personal perspective, working with large energy-intensive loads, that discussion happens all the time. You can ask, for example, a steel mill, can you run at lower levels during peak? Can you do one thing, or can you set lower tap settings and basically melt less steel during the day and more at night? And you have those kinds of discussions. The problem, and this has been debated endlessly in the mass market, is the extent that there's information out there. A large customer like Nucor has that information. In contrast to the remark earlier this morning about not knowing when the refrigerator is unplugged, they know when we turn off the furnace. And so that is different. But essential to that is actually metering and getting the information. It's hard to mass market things if people don't have the information to care about it in the first place.
Can I take a shot at that?
Yeah.
Now, I know what to do with the microphone, so Chris Caller from Direct Energy. I agree completely that with the Steve Jobs comment. I also think of it in terms of Doritos. Before they had Doritos, there was no actual need for Doritos. They invented...
And we were all a lot thinner.
I know, and they invented the desire for Doritos by coming up with that particular flavor combination. And I think what we've seen in other states and other countries where information is available is that the market is much more animated. And I think the committee members among the ESCO committee in particular believe that if you give us a couple of things, one is as close to real-time data as possible from smart meters, and the other is the supplier consolidated billing platform. It's up to us to come up with the innovative products and services, and I think we have demonstrated that where we have that capability, that the market's able to do it. And one example I would use of something that I don't think anybody really would have thought before it was being done, that this was something that would really catch customers' imagination, is in Texas. There are a number of providers who offer prepaid products. Now, up here, I think that remains almost anathema. But actually what we found in Texas is that customers love it. They love it for a couple of reasons. One, they don't have to pay a deposit. But really the thing they like about it is they get information daily about their usage. And even with just a simple text message telling them you used X kilowatt hours between now and the previous message, you have this much left on your account. We find that it not only lets customers manage their energy usage almost in real time, but they actually use less than they would without those kinds of messages. So it's a fairly simple thing. You're just telling people, this is what you used, this is how much you have left on your account. But you can't do that without the data essentially in real time. So that's really, to us, is kind of the key to all this, the data and then the billing platform to be able to reach customers with new products and services.
Any other questions for Jay? Thank you. So we will go on.
So we'll turn it over to Chris.
Thank you. Once again, that's Chris Callaher from Direct Energy, representing the committee with respect to barriers to mass market engagement from the ESCO perspective. Oh, I went too far. So we identified 5 key barriers. 3 of them are really kind of related to the same thing, which is the availability of advanced metering infrastructure. First is just the absence of full smart meter deployment. Second is lack of real-time access to data from the meter, including from existing interval meters. So it has to be accurate data. That's the other key point. The next is real-time access to two-way functionality, the ability to communicate with the customer. The next is limited billing options. And then there are a couple of other regulatory and rate-making issues that I'll mention at the end. With respect to the meter functionality, I think, Jay certainly got at this a bit, and it's an issue with C&I customers as well. Most DER really works optimally with smart meters. To really monetize the value of taking certain behaviors with respect to your energy consumption, you need to get real-time credit for that. If you're shaving the peak or shifting load, you really need to be able to respond to the hourly price. Now, obviously, traditional energy efficiency is an exception to that, but in general, if we're going to reach all the customers, I think the preferred end state among the members of the committee and the ESCO community is a full deployment. We certainly recognize there was a lot of healthy debate about this, that not all stakeholders agree that a 100% deployment is cost justified, and that there are material concerns about data privacy and confidentiality and possible health impacts. Some related issues, I went past it again, have to do with meter functionality and access to data. We also recognize that you really want to build a case for longer-term solutions. I think everybody recognizes we can't do all this at once. We can't have a full smart meter deployment in the next 6 months. We have to use a flexible approach early on to really make the case for these longer-term solutions. And there are some possible near-term solutions related to smart meter rollout and some of the data issues. There's certainly the idea of voluntary deployment, that if, for example, an ESCO or some other third party could identify customers who wanted to use some of these products, then the utility would install smart meters in their homes. And then you can run a little pilot, in fact, that way. There's also the possibility of third-party deployment, which I think theoretically is possible now, but may well be somewhat cost prohibitive. It doesn't even have to necessarily be a smart meter itself. There are alternatives. There are other devices that one could place in the homes or small businesses of potential customers. But the key there, again, would be you'd have to qualify the data for settlement purposes with the utility and the ISO to be able to get full credit. There's also the alternative that National Energy Marketers has come up with for retail demand response load profiles, which would be load profiles specific to certain kinds of either voluntary or involuntary demand responsive behavior for customers without smart meters. And this would let ESCOs and their customers monetize some of the value of that behavior without necessarily having smart meters. We also think there are some possible early wins from the work being done right now with data validation and the EDI work streams, which I believe have been reported on separately. I think the key point here is that even where you don't have the possibility yet to fully monetize the value of behavior, you can, in fact, change people's behavior by giving them the data, even if they can't get full credit for acting upon it. It's sort of it's related to the example of the prepaid products. If you just tell people, even if they weren't getting, they're not necessarily changing their behavior because they know that they're going to get credit in the real-time market. It's like you change what you measure. And so we think there's a lot of benefit from giving people this information as quickly as possible. Certainly the ESCO community represented on the committee felt very strongly that the lack of a comprehensive billing relationship is a key barrier to engagement. And we would really like to have the ability to provide an ESCO consolidated bill in a very efficient manner. It certainly gives us the ability to bill an unlimited number, essentially, of products and services, and to create that one-to-one relationship with the customer. There's lots of debate about the continuation of other options. A number of ESCOs themselves would like to continue to have the option of utility billing, and there's also the existing option which many C&I customers and an increasing number of even mass market customers and ESCOs serving them use, which is dual billing, which is certainly a bridge option that could get us to some of these other products and services. So there's also within the utility bill billing platform, there's the possibility of more flexible bill-ready utility billing as opposed to rate-ready, which would allow us to offer new and multiple products and innovative price plans. A couple of other things quickly. The net metering protocol certainly, and I think this was discussed well in the report. It really limits the ability, the ESCO's ability, without being able to get those net generation credits. We can't really incorporate a lot of behind-the-meter generation into our portfolio, which limits the value of it to us. And there are also some rules that limit the ESCO customer relationship. The inability to do an apples-to-apples comparison with utility commodity price, I think, is frequently cited by members of the committee. The need to have an account number to switch suppliers. You know, I don't want to over-analogize to the telecom industry, but you know, you can walk around with your smartphone and go into any store and change your service with just what you have right there on you. You can't really do that with your electric account. And while we certainly recognize, and everybody recognizes, that there's a customer protection aspect to the existing system, if there were any way to sort of get more of that portability that you have on the telecom side, it would be very helpful. And then finally, customer inertia itself can be a barrier. This, you know, we could talk about this all day. The decision way back when, you know, to really make the utilities the default commodity provider. The commodity remains kind of a lead product for ESCOs. And so if there were any way to move customers around at scale to sort of break that inertia with the utility, that could be helpful in customer engagement. So just to sum up, I think the ESCOs on the committee felt very strongly that, you know, we can improve customer engagement with the right market structure, and that the existing barriers mostly relate to some kind of interference or in the directness of our relationship with our customers. Again, especially with respect to data and the ability to bill innovative products and services. And that if we can get those barriers resolved or lowered, even with some of these shorter-term measures, that I think the ESCO community is pretty confident that they can provide the products and services that customers want, and also that will meet a lot of the goals that you're seeking here in the REV proceeding. So I see I've actually uncharacteristically finished early, meaning expect pigs to fly soon, and I would be happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Questions for Chris Gear?
You used the phrase ESCO products and services. I'm pretty familiar with the ESCO products and pricing provisions. Can you just give me some examples of services, especially in the context of REV, that you would envision?
Well, there are a number of things, and I guess the products and services, it can be a fine line between the two. There are a number of things.
I'm thinking prices.
Oh, sure. Okay.
So non-price things that you're providing to the customers and how that relates to REV.
Well, some of them actually relate to, can at least relate indirectly to price. For example, you can, we offer, and a number of other ESCOs offer smart thermostats. And so you can have, we're doing our own, in fact, we're doing our own, I guess it's like a critical peak pricing program with Nest thermostats. We've rolled it out in Alberta, where, you know, customers, it's called rush hour rewards, so it's like the critical peak. Again, it's related to price, but it's more like, it's a demand response service, essentially. But it's kind of bundled up and marketed in something that I think is meant to engage customers. That's one example. Other things, we're definitely looking at partnerships with, and a number of ESCOs are doing this. Rooftop solar is a focus of a number of ESCOs. In fact, I was telling my colleague John Holtz, I saw an ad for NRG Solar when I was in the Berkshires last weekend. So other behind the meter technologies, I think, are becoming increasingly the focus of ESCOs. We've even been looking at energy storage technologies, micro CHP, a number of the behind the meter the distributed generation technologies are increasingly the focus of ESCO activity. There are also things that are a little bit sort of off the pure energy consumption or energy commodity topic that I think still fit in with what you're trying to do. For example, home warranties or home protection plans. They typically come, if you're talking about the HVAC system, with annual inspections or semi-annual inspections, which have been shown to increase the performance and decrease the overall consumption of that equipment. And then there are other there's other functionality that you can get with specific pieces of equipment, again, in the home, that you can use a sensor that will give you the data feed of a particular piece of equipment. And if you have communication with the customer, there are all sorts of things you can do with actually turning down or turning off or monitoring, just for sort of home management purposes. Oh, I left the stove on. If it's an electric stove, then you can control that. But then there are also demand response possibilities for those appliances. Hot water heaters, that's actually electric hot water heaters, a big potential source, easy, low-hanging fruit of demand response. Same with refrigerators, with the defrost cycle. So we're trying to figure out all of these different things, but there are products out there now and services that ESCOs are offering that make use of those functionalities.
Do you have Chris, I have a follow-up, because, I mean, your job, I mean, what retailers do, ESCOs do, is obviously provide services to end-use customers. When you see things, do you from the perspective of value, if you were able to get the value of a demand reduction from a DSPP, would you then necessarily reflect that in a real-time price, or would you do something such as a prepay or a discount? Do you see, I mean, I'm just kind of curious from your construct and experience with consumers, is it necessary for the consumers necessarily see the real-time price, or can they do it in other terms like a credit or something else on a bill that you could then pass the value on back to them but provide it as a service?
No, that's a great question. I think the number of customers who want and can tolerate real-time is probably pretty narrow, and within the mass market space, I think it's very narrow. Obviously, larger customers are much better able to do that. But then within the mass market, I think you have two basic ways to go. There are still going to be customers who want a fixed price, but with these kinds of technologies, you can offer a lower fixed price. And if you're communicating to the customer that you're getting a lower fixed price by agreeing to do X, Y, and Z, which we will make it seamless for you to do, then it's a fixed price product that doesn't totally divorce the customer from the kind of engagement that you're trying to get. Because that's always been the knock on fixed price or average pricing, is it doesn't send those price signals.
Right.
Well, if you have the ability to make use of load shifting, then you should be able to offer a lower fixed price and still, as long as it's communicated and sold to the customer properly, engage them by making that kind of demand responsive behavior a requirement for that lower price. But I think the rebate option is an excellent one, because it's a similar thing, but instead of just getting an overall lower fixed price, you might have a fixed price, again, with the rebate. And I think that's actually how the Rush Hour Rewards program that we've rolled out in Alberta works, because customers do, I mean, there are different preferences for different customers. Some would like to have the certainty of a lower fixed price, but others, because they're not sure if they're going to be able to, conform their behavior, they might prefer to get the money back when they're able to actually respond to the price signal. But I think certainly both work, and I think that's one of the messages from the ESCO community is it's a big market out there, and relatively small pieces of customer engagement can get you lots of benefit in the wholesale market. So we need all of it, basically.
So, I mean, one of our takeaways, I think, from the meeting we had in Albany was that not all mass market consumers are alike. They're different folks, different demographics, different ages. And what I'm hearing you say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, is you want the latitude to be able to offer and design products to attract load, but what you need is the credit then for the products, for the value you're providing back to the DSPP to be real time.
That's exactly right.
So for you, then the standardization would be making certain that if you're able to reduce demand at certain times with your consumers, that's credited for those hours that you're actually reducing the demand, and you don't have this 2-month lag that we have today.
That's exactly right, yes.
And I would go back to Jay. I think, from what I understood, you're saying essentially the same thing.
That's right. Yes.
So then the question is, and we've had an earlier panel talk about this, I know we have interval meter at the customer, certainly the large consumer level. But as far as you're concerned, Chris, if we can get there without getting AMI, it's okay? I saw that slide. It's just an issue of the how, right?
Well, there's the how, and then there's the how much. Okay. How much it's going to cost. Because there are definitely, there are other devices, but certainly if you're going to go through the process of qualifying those other devices to be able to use settlement quality, to get settlement quality data from those devices that the ISO and the utility will use, and then you have to include the cost of the device in whatever bundled product or service you're offering to the customer. That certainly changes the financial characteristics of that product. And I think, it's the big question now is, does it narrow it? How much does it narrow it? I mean, I think my gut feeling is that it probably narrows it considerably. And unfortunately, it probably narrows it to a fairly small number of relatively affluent, large consuming customers. Whereas if you had a full smart meter deployment, obviously it opens up, from an economic perspective, the possibility of similar products based on load shifting and load shaving to a much broader range of socioeconomic classes and consumption classes as well.
Could you, just as a matter of curiosity, could you envision, though, that there could be a variety of solutions based on customers' class? So on some classes, for example, you might say apartment dwellers, you could do more of a algorithmic methodology as opposed to certain users who might be able to individualize their use, because at a certain level gets to be, does everyone need to be metered at the same level, or can you say that for smaller users of electricity that seems to be overkill based on how much they could actually affect the system?
Right. Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the things that's very interesting about the NEM proposal, is that you might be able to reach a large number of customers that aggregated together. Even aggregated together, you might not be able to justify a smart meter deployment for that particular sector, but you could still get, I don't know what percentage of the value you could get, but you would certainly be able to derive much more value from that group of customers with something like that without smart meters. And like you say, it's quite possible that that deployment to them might, it might never be cost justified, or at some point far in the future.
Any further questions? Gosh, I have one more. It might be helpful, I think, too, as we're going on. I know you guys have experience in Texas and other markets, and I think in your report you may list some of these. But it is good, I think, for us as part of our docket or proceeding to get as much information as we can as the products and services that are being offered elsewhere that maybe, to Commissioner Brown's point, are just not being offered here today, and what it would take to get there. Some of the things that you're doing, like Free Fridays and critical peak pricing, and the value you're seeing. And I would offer that to all the ESCOs, as well as the commercial industrial class, because we don't necessarily need to invent everything in New York, just 90% of things. So it would be good to get the other information.
We just need the credit.
Yeah, we just want the credit. Right.
I just want to follow up on what the chair was talking about. Your company is a large company. We have a lot of smaller ESCOs. So is there consensus amongst the big versus the small in the direction that you want to proceed in?
Absolutely not.
That's what I thought.
Right, and that is there's definitely a divide there. And on the billing issue, for example, a number of smaller ESCOs, and not even that small ESCOs sometimes, don't particularly want to take on the billing function, because as it's typically envisioned, you also take on, at least to some extent, the credit risk of the delivery portion of the bill. So from a financial perspective, it's a much different burden than it is using the utility platform, and many ESCOs would prefer to just continue to use the utility platform. So that's a clear example. But even some of the other issues, the ability or the desire to make use of smart meter data and interval data to do innovative products and services, I think there are probably a number of ESCOs who believe that there's a perfectly good market for commodity-only sales, and that's really all they have an interest in pursuing. So there's probably a difference of opinion about. I guess what I'm saying is that there's a difference of opinion about the two most fundamental things from the ESCO perspective. So that, given the diversity in the group, I guess that shouldn't surprise us.
Thank you.
I think it's fair to say that this committee, there wasn't a fair amount of consensus on anything. Right? I'm going to now introduce Cameron Brooks, who's going to talk about effective customer engagement.
Yep. Great. Well, good afternoon. My name is Cameron Brooks, and it's an honor to be here on behalf of the Consumer Engagement Committee. My firm, Tolerable Planet Enterprises, serves as an advisor to many companies with device, platform, and software solutions for consumer engagement. We also track regulatory proceedings addressing demand-side management issues and distributed generation across the 50 states. So with that in mind, I've been asked to address the committee's discussions and findings from the perspective of those companies operating primarily in the consumer as distinct from the utility market channels. I'd be hardly the first one to observe that this marketplace has blossomed in the past few years. Consumers today have a range of off-the-shelf options for intelligent thermostats, control devices, auditing and diagnostic software. Similarly, data-driven solutions are providing micro-targeting of customers to increase the effectiveness of both regulated programs and services offered competitively at the system level. Now, consumer engagement covers a wide range of activities. So the committee established a taxonomy that organized consumer engagement activities into 4 classes, which you see listed here. The first 2 categories, general education and regulated demand-side management programs, were deployed with approved budgets and system benefit charges, although we recognize that may change in the future as a result of this proceeding. The third category, consumer products and services, presents New York, frankly, with a unique opportunity to supplement the success of these traditional utility channels with products and services available and soon to be available in the consumer marketplace. Let's see, I don't know if we can go. I guess I got ahead of myself here. I'll just briefly characterize each of the 4 classes. General education and outreach refers to efforts to educate the consumer about broad public policy goals and market changes. A simple example from recent history would include efforts by New York and other states to educate the consumer about restructuring and the introduction of retail competition. The second category encompasses the broad class of regulated programs administered both by utilities and by independent agencies, and where independent measures drive some kind of energy efficiency or develop a demand response resource. Their successful history has been expanded in recent years with improvements including behavior-based programs and bring your own thermostat programs for residential demand response. Further programs that were discussed within the committee could include things like a hosted marketplace to facilitate commerce between consumers and products and services, perhaps as a transition strategy. The third category, as discussed previously, presents a tremendous opportunity to yield even greater innovations in the years ahead. Consumers may not be particularly interested in their energy use per se, and we've noted that multiple times as a barrier, but they are currently purchasing energy efficiency and load control capabilities embedded within home security, entertainment, and connected lifestyle solutions. So a key question that this committee tried to look at was how do we leverage these capabilities to achieve some of the market animation goals. And finally, we discussed the variety of financing tools that New York is developing as customer engagement tools in and of themselves. Barriers identified include incentive structures that only consider the consumer and not the platform provider, which leave demand response potential underdeveloped. And similarly, private or public-private investment mechanisms in essential facilities like metering infrastructure, that I think Chris was alluding to before, could enhance the market, addressing a barrier presented by the cost-effectiveness screens applied to universal deployment scenarios. We don't need to really spend much time on this slide, but we put it together just as a reference to highlight some of the examples in each category. So in closing, I'd just highlight a few of the fundamental observations from the staff report that's consistent with the discussions within the committee about how to engage consumers and how to animate the marketplace. At its most basic level, the reformed energy vision that you've described is really similar to the old energy vision. I see it as having 4 pieces. 1, there is an engaged and informed customer buying. 2, products and services. That 3, engage the system effectively. And 4, encourage investments that improve the system. As the Commission noted in its initiating order, it's really only the context, not the fundamental vision that's changed. But in this new context, each of these 4 pieces has a barrier that's essential to address if the goal is to address market animation through this consumer channel. So first, and this has been touched on before, consumers have to be informed and able to engage in the marketplace, which begins with access to their own usage, pricing, and account information. These have been consistently identified as barriers across all market segments, and they prevent consumers from being able to engage in the market in the first place. Seemingly simple transactions like entering in your account number have been shown to be existential barriers to enrolling in programs or signing up for competitive services. Similarly, innovative services like building profiling, load disaggregation, thermostat optimization, energy auditing software that are available today now are starved of information which provide them the basic component, and it should be a basic component of all customer service across all customer classes. So second would be products and services. And here, I would say that tariff structure and product innovation have been highlighted as barriers to effective consumer engagement multiple times. And to me, that suggests that if the DSPP is going to be a platform provider, then it has to be designed to engage with other platforms that are being offered in the marketplace through this non-utility channel. So what that might mean is that tariffs designed not only at the customer level, but also at the aggregator level, will more effectively allow neighborhoods of homes with intelligent thermostats to provide demand response services, just as an example. Third, addressing system efficiency. The effective use of the system, and again, this has been highlighted on a couple of the different panels, requires some kind of basic profile information for the distribution system as it exists today. Feeder-level profile information with corresponding tariffs will ensure that distributed energy resources of all kinds are appropriately located and supported financially. California is pursuing just such a distribution level planning scheme, and they have an implementing proceeding that's anticipated to open up earlier this year. So that may serve both as precedent and a model to look at. Fourth, I would address investment. And the consumer marketplace is a tremendous resource for needed infrastructure investments. And addressing barriers to individual consumer investments in, for example, advanced meters, as we've discussed, or service provider investments in network upgrades can bring benefits both to the consumer and to the system as a whole. So those are just a few observations coming from this consumer products channel, and I really appreciate the opportunity to represent both the committee and a notable class of its members, and look forward to our discussion about the best way to achieve the market animation goals that you've outlined.
Who is supposed to be educating in this new world of DSPPs? Who should be the entity that educates and informs the consumer of these various choices and options?
Well, I think precisely the reason that we laid out a taxonomy of different kinds of activities would suggest that there are different parties that might engage in different kinds of outreach programs. So if you look at some of the traditional programs like the general education and outreach, that might be a commission-led effort, or it might be a commission-directed effort to say we want to educate the consumer about the kinds of changes that have just happened in their marketplace. For things like demand-side management programs that traditionally the utility has run and presumably the DSPP might continue, it seems that they would be the ones that would be both targeting and educating consumers about the programs that would be available to them through that channel. But I think fundamentally in the consumer channel, it would be the companies offering products and services. We generally don't think about it as being called education. We think of it as being called marketing. But there's a tremendous amount of education, and if we go back to the telecom model, or analogy, there was no government program that informed the customer about how to use their telephone or what their rate options were. They went out into the marketplace as informed and engaged consumers, and they started to work in that market. So I think the same thing would happen here, and I think that's fundamentally a principle or a base assumption of what you've described as market animation. So I don't think there is a who. I think it's several who's doing different kinds of activities.
Do companies like Direct at this point in time kind of, let's go to Texas where I think you're a big player. Are you doing what the long distance companies did, and what year would that be, Greg? 1995 or 91 or something?
Greg wasn't born yet.
When they started offering all these free weekends and started marketing all the various things. Is that happening?
Yeah, absolutely. What you find in places like Texas, and certainly I can't forget the UK either, because the UK has had that market structure for much longer than Texas has. But you know, people advertise. I mean, as Cameron said, there are the traditional consumer education channels that you would expect in a market that at this point is relatively mature. So and we absolutely agree with the view that you know, for a large portion of these distributed energy resources, if they are really going to make sense for customers, then third parties are going to come in and they're going to do those things that are needed to engage customers, which means doing marketing activities that at the same time educate customers.
So I guess as a follow-up on that, both in Texas and in the UK, there were certainly more latitude around billing and things like that, but they also imposed more requirements on the retailers, and I know you're speaking for a large retailer, but it seems to me part and parcel with allowing the market to kind of get generated. We as regulators always have a concern about also the natural protections, and we have that in the telecom market as well. So it seems to me that like I said, would interested in your reaction to that there's a discipline, and it may not be a pricing discipline, but there certainly needs to be some discipline around how consumers are interfaced so that we don't have things like slamming and cramming and all the various things that we've suffered through. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And you know, I will say that I think Texas gets a bit of a bad rap. I think people think it's not that they do anything to encourage this view of themselves that they're all cowboys, but there are surprisingly robust consumer protections in Texas. Theirs, of course, is the summer shut-off moratorium, whereas ours is the winter shut-off moratorium. But it is absolutely a critical part of the market to work. You have to have credibility with customers. Customers have to know that they can, you know, that they can reliably go out into the market and engage and be animated without suffering negative consequences. So it's absolutely a critical part of what you're doing.
And I would just add to that. I mean, I agree that it's absolutely critical. It seems to me that falls naturally into the domain of the regulated programs to both look at customer protections that might be needed, but also services or extra support for disadvantaged classes that in shorthand might fall through the cracks or be left behind. But I'm not sure that that is the critical question, or a critical question to ask would be how much of the market can be served and leveraged using non-utility consumer market channels. And I think the answer is that if you set up the rules right, you provide incentives that allow aggregators to actually engage with the DSPP directly and serve as that intermediary to the customer, you're going to see a vast majority of the market be able to adopt new products and services that are available off the shelf today, many new ones that have not yet been announced or discovered or developed. And so I guess the question would be, if that covers 80–90% of the market and you need to address that other 10 or 20% through some kind of dedicated program, isn't that a great success? And isn't that the goal of the REV proceeding here?
So, Cameron, just a couple questions I have for you. And then one is just, we reference a hosted market. Can you explain what that is?
Well, it's a model that I'm not sure has necessarily been deployed, but it was certainly discussed. And the idea would be, especially as a transition strategy, there may be an opportunity for the utility or the DSPP to help motivated customers get connected to the service providers that can help them, for example, implement the measures that are recommended from an energy audit, whether that's putting them in touch with a contractor or being able to look, for example, at equipment that might need servicing and being able to connect them to those service providers in a marketplace exchange setup where there might be revenue opportunities that flow savings level to the consumer, obviously directly to that service provider, and maybe by commission or finder's fee or something like that to support the platform that the DSPP is providing.
That, just in terms of also products, one of the things that I think that, at least my observation we suffer through in the electric sector is that from our consumers, it's very difficult. The market's really opaque now. If you were to get a sort of an offer from 3 different providers, there's no way you can go and say, well, how does that compare? Because they're so different. And just from your experience, is there some value in order of animating the market just to get some level of consistency and then also allow for some level of innovation? I'm just thinking about these consumers, and they get cards in the mail, but how do they know? And that's certainly been our struggle in the ESCO proceeding, is figuring out how to get consumers informed so that they feel like they're an informed buyer. Not just about price, but who's offering a value.
Yeah. Well, certainly I think there is a place for that, and I think that kind of apples-to-apples comparison, is something that the Commission can help direct and have the DSPP provide, and that was an objective in many states related to retail competition, was to be able to set up those kinds of calculators. It may also be worth noting that consumers, and as has been discussed many times, at a certain level are fundamentally disinterested with their energy use. And there's emotional reasons why that might exist, and there's purely rational reasons why that should be 20th on the priority list of most American families. And so I think there has long been a discussion within the regulatory community about how to educate and drive prices down to the consumer. I think that actually what you are proposing here in this proceeding is a better approach, which is how do you start to bring transparency to that pricing structure and allow intermediary structures so that loads can be aggregated and engaged at the system level, and there can be innovation provided by companies like Direct Energy or other energy service providers or device manufacturers to be able to build that kind of risk of what the energy price is going to look like into their business model so that the consumer doesn't have to. But clearly, I do think there's a role for bringing transparency, unbundling the prices, and establishing some kind of mechanisms that allow that apples-to-apples comparison.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you, Cameron.
Thank you.
So I'd like to now introduce Brian Murphy, who's going to talk about community choice aggregation.
Thank you very much.
Welcome, Brad.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the Commission, thank you for having me here today. I'd like to thank Luann Scherer for the invitation to speak on behalf of the committee, and I'd also like to thank the over 150 other members of the committee who offered lots of thoughtful and constructive feedback, not only on the broader topic of community choice aggregation, but specifically on the content of the slides you're about to see. We'll do a brief overview and then actually get into some of the details of what community choice aggregation is. It is one additional model for engaging customers, which was the purpose of the committee's work here in the last several months. And it's used with varying degrees of success in several other states, including California, Ohio, Illinois, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. It's an optional buying group. It's something that's organized at the municipal level. The municipal corporation itself, whether it be a city or town or village, enters into an electricity supply contract on behalf of customers who remain on default service with the distribution company. And of course, in order to work effectively, it's an opt-out program, so all customers are automatically enrolled unless they opt out, and they are given adequate notice by their local municipality about the new program. And one of the things they can do is to offer long-term fixed rates or even greener power supply options. And it's, our research suggests that successful CCAs are those in which the customers identify the program with their municipality, so there's a strong local connection between the government and the end user. Oops. What are some of the potential benefits for a CCA? Well, the experience of other states suggests that it's yet another way of engaging consumers and opening up choice in this particular market. While consumers do have, or in many cases are flooded with offers from energy marketers, this is one other way to get that process started. And consumers can always make the choice to either go back to the utility or to find a provider on their own. It gives the local municipality a chance to set its own energy goals, and these can come in the form of, as I mentioned before, longer-term rates or greener power supply options. And while this is especially true in states with either 6-month or 1-year fixed rates, it can be attractive for a town to offer longer-term rates in order to help customers avoid volatile market swings in the price for power due to natural gas. And that's especially true in Massachusetts, where they're so dependent upon natural gas. The experience of other states also suggests that these programs can be run with minimal investment on the part of the local government. The costs of the design, implementation, and management of the programs can be outsourced to energy consultants who are compensated through a fixed fee that's added to the price for power. Generally speaking, there are no penalties for consumers. Most states allow there to be some penalty if the consumer wants to leave the program after a defined period of time, but in practice, most municipalities create a completely open-ended option for consumers to leave and choose any other provider or default service that they wish. And furthermore, the buying group creates leverage that an individual consumer is likely not able to do on his or her own. Some other potential benefits of community choice are that the terms and conditions of the energy supply contract can be designed in a way that's very favorable to the consumer, and this is particularly true with respect to data management. The program also has public oversight. Local officials are ultimately in charge of managing either the ESCO or the consultant that works with them to manage the program. And almost every CCA in all the states that I mentioned usually has retained a professional consultant to help them manage the program. Some of the CCAs have also, including, for example, the City of Chicago and the City of Lowell, Massachusetts, have greened up their entire supply portfolio through a community choice aggregation. And furthermore, it offers a way to keep the public educated and engaged. And I know that's been the subject of many of the questions that have already been asked here. And we like to note that, as I said before, successful CCAs are one in which there's a strong identification between the consumer and the local government, that they believe that the local government is out there looking out for them offering them a supply contract that they don't have the obligation to accept, but that they have the opportunity to if they'd like to. However, the committee did note there are some concerns. The key thing, the non-starter, is that this can't happen without a policy change, that would require a change to the Uniform Business Practices Code that the Commission currently has. And that opt-out exemption could be specifically carved out just for CCAs. It's been our experience, both as consultants to these programs in Massachusetts and in our research about CCAs across the country, is that these programs need to be authorized by the local governing authority. Again, that's usually a city council or a town board with the approval of the mayor or town or city manager. Contracts need to have safeguards, and this is particularly true, again, as I mentioned before, with regard to data management. The town has access to consumer data, the ESCO has access to consumer data, and of course the utility does too, and so the contract needs to button down those obligations fairly specifically. In nearly every case, the local governments have outsourced the management of these programs because of the technical nature of much of what goes on with these things. ESCOs are not prevented from marketing to people who take energy through a CCA, so there's no ban on marketing. So just as consumers currently get marketed to by ESCOs, they can continue whether they're getting power through a CCA or not, and any consumers that are currently with an ESCO stay with the ESCO. It's only consumers who are still on default service that would be initially eligible to participate in these programs. In other states, the opt-out aggregation model has historically attracted large ESCOs, not small ones. And I know, Chris had already mentioned that there's a bit of a divide between the two. But in a state like New York that has a purchase of receivables program, that should go some distance to mitigate the limitation that other states have experienced when it comes to who's bidding on aggregations. Others have expressed concern about government involvement in retail markets generally, and there's fear that CCAs would, pick winners and losers through its intervention in the market, and that would confer an unfair advantage on an ESCO who has the ability to participate through this opt-out, whereas everybody else has to participate through an opt-in. And while I can't say this definitively, it's my belief that that other states that have done this all have longer-term default rates, either 6-month or 1-year utility default rates, unlike New York, which has the 1-month more market-based pricing. These are some case studies that I think have some instruction for us here today. The first is the city of Lowell, Massachusetts, population about 100,000. And this city was able to the ESCO was directed by the city, I should say, to cover 100% of the power supply portfolio needs through RECs, renewable energy credits from main hydropower resources. And even after that was factored in, the initial price was 20% lower than the default price. And in Massachusetts, the default prices last for 6 months. The second case study is from Lancaster. This is a much smaller community, but the town owned or still owns a solar farm that it owed a bond on, and so it used revenue raised by selling the solar renewable energy credits to aggregation participants to help pay down the bond. And another example is the city of Marlborough, Massachusetts, which used its aggregation purely to beat the utility price. And so at one point, after its own aggregation price went upside down with regard to the utility price, the town elected to suspend the program. And that was it worked exactly as they designed it. When it didn't work, they put the brakes on it. And so that's another thing that aggregation can do. It's not something that has to continue simply because it starts. I won't get into too much detail with the next couple of slides, but here are some elements of what an aggregation plan should look like. And our research suggests that in other states, the general model is to have the local governing authority design and publicly review a very detailed plan so that every consumer has the opportunity to participate in its design and review, but also has the opportunity to read and understand what may happen to them if, in fact, the town or city that they live in affects one of these contracts. And this next slide suggests the various roles that the different parties can take. And you'll note that on the municipality side, you're looking at lots of authorization, approval, and oversight, but most of the hard work, so to speak, is done by the consultant in conjunction with the ESCO. So that's where the town can benefit by outsourcing most of the labor to qualified consultants. And the utilities continue to do the billing and providing the delivery service. And finally, there are really 3 steps that almost every community who's designed a CCA has taken, and that is they have to pass a referendum, an ordinance, some sort of initial process in which the public has the right to participate to authorize aggregation, and then they generally, through an open public bidding process, find a consultant to help them design and manage these things. And then with the consultant, they publish the aggregation plan and its supporting documents for public review. And that's well before they even dip their toe in the market. But those are the 3 steps that towns need to take before they start. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions if you have them.
Questions? Yeah.
I'm curious, just an experience we had in New York State this last year. School districts, in essence, do this for their districts. And I heard complaints because this year their bills went up 200, 300%. And I asked some of them if they had the opportunity to fix their price beforehand, and they said, well, sure, but that would have cost us money the last 4 years. And when you describe this, it sounds like, well, it was 20% less, probably because the predicted price ended up being higher than what the natural gas prices, which were going like that for a long time. Now we've seen the opposite effect, and I'm just wondering about your experience in Massachusetts, where I'm sure that some of the areas must have had that same exact phenomena this year.
Well, actually, the city of Lowell's case, where the price was 20% less than the default rate, that deal was just struck in February of this year, so in a period of extreme volatility and rapidly rising prices. The utility in Massachusetts procures twice a year for 50% of its load, so the price is generally a blend of a couple of historical purchases. And so a community that wants to initiate one of these programs generally needs to deliver some savings relative to the utility, at least initially. But after that, they're free to set whatever goals they want. And we know what's going to happen in New England this winter is that we have relatively mild pricing now in the summer at the real or short-term level, and extremely high prices next winter. And so we're looking, our clients are asking us to help them smooth out those peaks. And it does mean, yeah, they're a little higher than the valley, but it's a risk that they're willing to take in order to offer stability to their residents, who can always opt out. In January, they're going to be saving 3 or 4 cents a kilowatt hour. If they're losing a couple cents in the summer, they can opt out if they want. And so
do you think the municipalities understand that this is not always a win-win? You don't win every time unless you perfectly can predict the future.
That's correct. It does take education. I know that's one of the themes here today, and that includes not educating the mass market is tough enough, but in our case we target mayors and city councilors, and we talk with them and help them because they're also homeowners as well, and they're energy consumers, and so they do need to understand that it's not I'm always going to beat the utility rate scenario. That's just not possible.
Diana, then go ahead.
So it seems like the structure of the utility default rate is critical for providing customers the ability to make an informed and rational choice under any competitive program. And therefore, is it even possible to make real progress without dealing with the structure of the default choice? And was that discussed among the working group?
I don't recall potential changes to the way default service is priced as being one of the topics. I would defer to Luann on that.
Yeah, we talked about the difficulty in understanding the utility default price, but we didn't talk about it in the context of community choice aggregation.
Okay.
I think one of the things that Brian maybe touched on a little bit was just the volume. So in an opt-out program where 90% or so of the residents decide to take service from the ESCO is going to be able to offer better pricing. So I think that's one of the reasons why the city of Lowell was able to do better, because there was the buying power of that ESCO.
Thank you.
Is there anything other than our uniform business practices and the opt-in rules that would keep a municipality in New York from doing something like this under our existing regime?
Not to my knowledge.
So Ted Kelly's over at the resource table, and he's done a lot of the legal research.
Hi. So the answer is not directly. The uniform business practices have several provisions that would prevent the opt-out and also prevent certain transfers of customer data. So there would also need to be revisions to the uniform business practices to permit those transfers. Also, our understanding is that under the provisions of the general municipal law that would allow municipalities to do this, they would need to have hold referendums in order to initiate programs, so have votes by their citizens, which would need to pass by 50%. But that's also a requirement in Illinois, which has seen a very successful uptake of community choice aggregation since it was initiated in, I believe, 2010, and they've seen hundreds of municipalities join, even though they did have to hold these referendums as New York would under current law.
Thank you.
Several questions. Under the typical programs, once an individual opts out, can they then opt in?
Can they get back in if they feel they've made a mistake by leaving?
Right.
Our experience is yes. And when a resident migrates either in or out, it generally doesn't affect the load that greatly. Suppliers or ESCOs are generally very concerned about industrial customers who, under at least most state laws, are required to be you have to invite them to join, and that they opt out. And if they do join, it does worry the ESCOs that they might migrate if they get a better offer sometime later. And so the price for that class can often vary dramatically from the price offered residential and small commercial classes.
So the other question I have is, I was looking at the size of the communities. I mean, it does strike me, and maybe others want to answer this too, that for smaller, more rural communities, this becomes a great way to reduce the transaction expense, maybe for all size communities, for ESCOs to get into the mass market, because essentially the municipality is sort of sub-aggregating for the benefit of the retailer or the ESCO to aggregate that load and get to that demand. And so do you see, I mean, because this is something we deal with certainly in telephone, is thinking about how rural communities or cable can get access to some of the same benefits that more urban communities get just because of sheer volumes. Has that been some of your experiences for smaller municipalities?
In our particular experience, yes, because it's easier to market our services to communities within a certain population range.
Right.
The fact that the city of Chicago did conduct a municipal opt-out aggregation is either, a harbinger of the future or an outlier. I don't know. It's hard to say. But, our experience is it is easier to deal with smaller communities. But maybe it's an open question still.
Is there any reason why this would be limited to commodity? Could you see, in addition to green power, demand management services being provided this way?
Well, yeah, I listened to Chris mention that there are some programs that allow, prepayment, and they trade fixed rates for incentives to drive down customer usage. Those are all things that I think would be great to offer at the municipal level, and I could envision at least every community having its own particular flavor and really driving innovation in this area by almost creating any number of what we could call pilot programs where these different products and services are rolled out.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah, I think that's really more the model that the California communities were attempting to get at. It was not just a commodity-only
That was
deal.
like Marin County, Mrs. Payne.
Exactly, and Sonoma County, I believe as well, did that. And in a lot of ways, it's really what ties us together with the REV.
Right.
Because certainly, I think a number of us have seen that at the municipal level, there's a lot of engagement. There are a lot of communities that are very concerned about the very things that you're talking about and that are themselves investigating microgrids and such. And this really, I think, represents the ability to sort of tie all those things together and also establish a longer-term relationship between an ESCO and a community that would allow you to do things like ultimately perhaps even put in iron in the ground, grid scale solar, for example, if a municipality wanted to do that. So it's very much something that I know a lot of companies like mine are thinking about.
And is it, this is inviting all sorts of questions, but is it possible to have multiple retailers provide services in one community, or is part of this is that there's a winner and they get the whole enchiladas, as Raj likes to say?
I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility. We've had some suppliers or ESCOs approach us about serving particular classes, that they would prefer to serve these classes and not those, and so we would find another supplier to serve that class. In my experience, it hasn't happened yet, but it's been suggested.
And then I had one more question for you, and then another one for the group. And then in these programs, are the municipal buildings part and parcel of the mix? Because the schools and, it just strikes me that anything you can do to create diversified load helps you manage the price better. Are you seeing that happen?
It varies. One of the things that led a lot of municipal officials to look at CCA was the fact that they had what they considered success on their own in the marketplace with their municipal buildings. And so to the extent that those buildings were already carved out or under separate contract, they'd go ahead with the CCA for the residents and small commercial anyway. But if they were in fact eligible to participate, either coming off of a contract, remaining on default for some particular reason, then yes, they're pooled in with the other customers.
Okay. One question actually for the group. You were here for the beginning panel talking about technology. If you were to go back and advise that panel as to what they've identified as sort of some of the roadmap issues, from your perspective of animating the market, were there things that you would say actually need to be considered? And I know one of them would, we talked about AMI, that you're saying, well, wait a minute, this has to happen or else the market won't happen. Do you have anything off? I'm just curious.
I'll take a stab at answering at least part of that question. One of the things that strikes me, both in the presentation this morning and in discussions largely about the smart grid over the last few years, there is a very widely held belief that somehow all of the communications and connectivity services need to run through one single platform. I don't understand the rationale that sits behind that. And so one of the things that I would suggest for the Commission to consider and for that committee to re-examine is, if communications is a function that is needed, is it required that there's one single communications platform, or are there multiple platforms by which you can engage consumers, be able to do things like load control, device management, and be able to aggregate, again, those services, whether it's energy efficiency or demand response or load management, and be able to deliver that to a tariff that the DSPP would provide.
And would those be, would you see platforms could be operated by multiple entities, or that there would be different platforms that would be made available? When you say one communication.
Well, I guess the question that I would ask is if fundamentally if the DSPP is providing some basic enabling functions like access to usage and pricing information, is it necessary that they also provide all of the controlling platform functions? And I think the answer that I would lead you to believe would be no. That if the question is about market animation, then that the market transaction is really at the tariff level. And how the load gets dropped, as long as it's reliably and verifiably dropped, I don't know that it needs to go through the communications for that kind of signaling need to go through a platform that is managed by the DSPP.
I really do think the question of smart meter deployment is a threshold issue in terms of technology. And, it's possible that there's an alternative. I think you're going to wait a long time, frankly. Especially if it's an alternative that will have to be qualified for settlement purposes with the ISO and the utility. I think it just puts you a long way off in terms of doing the things that you really want to do in a way that's truly an animated market. I think what a lot of us worry about on the ESCO side of things is that without and it is the data we want. So if there were some magical way to get the data without a smart meter, I think we would certainly be very, very interested in that. But I think what we worry is that without the ability to get the kind of data that the smart meter provides, that we're going to be sort of for a very extended period of time in this interim period where what you really have is the DSPP, which will be the utility, it sounds like, essentially putting out RFPs for things they want as part of their planning process. That's interesting, but I don't think that's really what you're talking about in the end state. I mean, I think it's an alternative to the existing approach to doing distribution utility planning, but I don't think it's the kind of animated, fully engaged, customer-driven market that you're talking about. So I think it probably is a consistent, even among the differences that we have on the other topics among the ESCO community. I think it's fair to say it's a consensus that that's a real threshold question that you're going to face on the technology side.
I'm sorry, are you two disagreeing, or are you?
No, I don't think that we are. Okay. And in fact, I was going to pile on to his comment. I do agree that some kind of AMI smart metering functionality feels like a threshold issue and just such a fundamental ingredient to the innovation that you're looking for that I struggle a little bit to understand the rationale why you would not move forward trying to create that kind of visibility at the consumer level. So I don't think we're disagreeing. I think we're agreeing.
Would that be AMI subject to the idea that there may be certain levels of load that you could do an REM type methodology, or would you say, because before I thought you said, Chris, you were indicating that there may be cost benefits that you could identify below which an AMI meter may not be necessary.
It could be, although I think it's possible to overbake that, frankly, because there's certainly there are distribution level, benefits to having that information in addition to what you might look at from the DER perspective. But because of at some point the transaction cost in identifying who's too small to get a smart meter might start to overwhelm whatever savings you might get from a more limited deployment. It's entirely possible. But I also admit I could be dead wrong about that. I mean, it might be a relatively simple exercise to say, well, below some threshold, you don't get one. But my caution is that if you're doing that based on some type of cost-benefit analysis, on the benefit side of things, I think the things we're talking about today are very difficult to quantify. And I think that's one of the things we've seen in some of these other cost-benefit analyses. I think this was, I remember in Connecticut, their scenarios were mostly unfavorable to smart meter rollout, but they were really looking on the benefit side pretty narrowly at what you could do through utility programs. So I think we're talking about things potentially on the benefit side that are much broader than that.
Maybe I can also offer one other point to maybe clarify the confusion that I think I hear in your question. AMI has often been put forward as both a metering platform and a control platform for connecting into the home to devices. I think what we've seen in the market is that that control function has not been realized for a number of different reasons. So when I talk about, and I think when Chris talks about the metering infrastructure being a fundamental ingredient, it's about that usage, perhaps pricing information. It's not about the single gateway into the home by which the consumer should receive information, messages, or control signals, because that has not been proven to be a very effective channel for those kinds of signals.
Thank you, and I think I just got
You're getting the red light.
We're getting the hook.
Great.
We'll be meeting after.
Yeah, to be continued.
So thank you, Jay, Chris, Cameron, and Brian. I just wanted to take a few minutes to identify a few of the many findings of the CEC, some of which we haven't discussed today. First, as you've heard, there are many effective ways to engage customers. Engagement models that include established community organizations such as faith-based organizations, schools, Rotary clubs, door-to-door and friend-to-friend marketing models have been successful in the solar industry because peer pressure, competition, and previously established modes of communication bring issues into the public domain. Second, a major barrier to customer engagement is a simple lack of awareness and understanding on the part of the customers. While informing customers of their options and the availability of products and services has typically been the responsibility of the providers of these products, various committee members believe that it's everybody's job. All market participants, including utilities, ESCOs, and the Department of Public Service. Further, an online marketplace could provide a single location to shop for products and services of multiple third parties. There's a split incentive issue, which we didn't talk about at all today. And I just want to, I'm raising it because I just want to remind everybody that there's 400,000 unmetered customers in New York City alone. And I'll also point out that sub-meters are smart meters, so that might be something that we need to think a little bit more about. Many of the participants highlight the absence of sufficient data because of the lack of AMI. We've talked about that. That said, incorporating behavioral psychology principles in the absence of smart metering, such as O-Power's Home Energy Report, have demonstrated that benchmarking a household's energy usage against that of their neighbors and peers is an effective strategy for engaging customers. The Green Button Initiative is something we didn't talk about. All of this is in the report that we submitted. I think the Green Button program is a method for customers to get their data out to providers to solicit products. Some of the utilities, the New York utilities, have already agreed to implement the Green Button. Many of the committee members concur that the current billing and payment processes for third parties is an issue. We probably need to spend some more time thinking about ESCO consolidated billing. That's pretty much it. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to everyone.
Let's do a quick change here.
Raj was cold.
And there is switching energy efficiency.
Only Raj personally responsible. He was complaining it was cold in here.
I'd rather it be cold. It's hot.
They're very warm.
I'd like to ask the Grids with Matt
since we
Wallace
just-
and Walter Levesque.
Since we just have two, can we get them all together? Say it again? Since we only have two folks here, and we have 4 chairs, we'll invite you in from Siberia.
Back from exile, we have.
Into Vladivostok.
What happened to their name? I don't know who yours is. She's
All right, it's a little less lonely. Good.
Recently, some of us were yelled at in New York City because the room we were holding a hearing in was too warm. Just want you to know, I'd hope for those in New York City to know it's warm here too when we're in public buildings. So it's not just our New York City office. Anyway, if folks want to take off their jackets, please feel free because we do know it gets a little warm. But we'll get started, I guess. Matt?
Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Matt Wallace. I'm an electric distribution systems engineer with the Office of Electric, Gas, and Water. I'm joined by Walter Levesque, Senior Principal Consultant for Distributed Energy Resources and Microgrids at DNV GL Energy Advisory. It is our pleasure to appear before you this afternoon and before this audience. Joining us also at the table are Tom Mimna from Consolidated Edison Company of New York, and Andrea Serbin from Pace Energy and Climate Center. Today we'll be presenting the findings of Working Group 2's Subcommittee on Microgrids and Community Grids. We'd like to proceed by describing the work and organization of this committee, add some background information, and speak to the issues we found regarding microgrids. The committee also identified the next steps we feel are appropriate for moving forward. Following the May 12th collaborative meeting, the Microgrid Committee commenced its work by assembling interested parties in weekly meetings that were attended in person and via the internet to study the questions from the April 25th REV report. We sought to answer these questions and identify additional issues and barriers that could be addressed to better enable the development of microgrids. The committee initially identified 5 broad topic areas to investigate. Volunteers were sought from the committee to organize subgroups that were tasked with performing such investigations. 54 unique participants met outside of the weekly microgrid meetings to focus on these areas with the objective of identifying issues and opportunities and reporting back to the committee with their findings. These groups were regulatory, economic and financial, interconnections, DSPP planning, and ownership and control. As we progressed, we identified 2 important issues that were not addressed. In reaction to this, the committee added 2 additional subgroups to identify the value of microgrids and their social, environmental, and community implications. To ensure consistency when identifying the issues associated with microgrids, we first had to answer the question, what is a microgrid? So we decided that the U.S. Department of Energy's definition was a good starting point, as this definition has traction in the industry. Beyond the definition, the committee looked for examples of various types of microgrids. The single customer microgrid is the most common type in New York State. Each of these microgrids serves only one entity. I think that for New Yorkers, the most well-known example is New York University, whose 13.4 megawatt combined heat and power unit kept the lights on for dozens of buildings at their campus in Manhattan's Washington Square at a time when Superstorm Sandy forced the rest of Lower Manhattan into darkness. The multi-customer microgrid is another type, although they are not as prevalent. The CHP unit at Burstone Energy Center in Utica, New York, is owned and operated by Cogen Power Technologies and provides energy to Faxton St. Luke's Healthcare Facility, St. Luke's Nursing Home, and Utica College. The New York PSC granted this project exemption from public service law in 2007, permitting it to serve multiple customers. Community microgrids are a type of multi-customer microgrid where the community is actively engaged in its design and implementation. An example of a community microgrid is the New York Prize competition announced by Governor Cuomo in January and Secretary Kaufman at the REV Symposium. There are other types of microgrids that do not fall within the DOE's definition, including standalone microgrids, which are not interconnected with the utility grid, dynamic microgrids, a conceptual model that is able to adjust its boundaries depending on the availability of its distributed energy resources, and regional microgrids, a concept where an entire region would be able to isolate itself from the rest of the grid.
Chair, Commissioners, microgrids potentially offer a number of benefits to facilities. I'm not sure why it's not working.
You have about 4 inches. It's
I
on,
don't
it
think-
just needs to be closer to you.
No, it wasn't on. Yeah, there you go.
Is that how you do it? Thank you, Mr. Brown. Chair, Commissioners, microgrids can potentially offer a number of benefits to facilities within its boundaries and to the larger grid. For example, enhanced energy efficiency results because there are no transmission line losses due to the local generation. Microgrid can optimize the efficiency of multiple diverse energy assets by controlling load, controlling generation, and engaging with storage, both thermal as well as electric. Reliability and resiliency can be improved. Lower cost distributed energy resources and the dual use of fuel can result in lower cost energy and increased environmental sustainability. Microgrids can be a versatile asset to the grid by offering a more elastic demand, providing additional capacity to export to the grid, and the potential to offer ancillary services such as voltage support at the distribution level. While resiliency alone might justify a single-user microgrid, it often may not justify the business case for a multi-user microgrid. Microgrid development, this is because it is difficult to include in the business case avoided cost due to potential outage. In the event of a grid emergency, a microgrid may ease the hardship of a community and provide uninterrupted energy to critical infrastructure, such as water and waste treatment facilities, as well as other critical facilities located within the microgrid. After the fact, we recognize the impact and the cost of the outage, but the value to the common good is hard to quantify before the fact. Further, a microgrid can be an avenue for private investment in new technologies and solution demonstrations without a risk to ratepayers. Within the committee's subgroups, many issues were identified and included in the report. From these issues, the following 4 common themes were identified, with economics leading the way. These are the most important issues affecting microgrid development. Outside of those cases where reliability is paramount, generally improving reliability alone will not make a microgrid economically feasible. There are significant challenges to achieving financial feasibility. Microgrids with significant local generation can offer to the grid and to the community values that are not presently monetized. Additionally, market penetration can improve the economics. Distributed energy resource participation in robust markets may improve the feasibility of microgrids. Standby rates and demand charges were designed to reflect the cost to the distribution system. These rates weren't designed to reflect the benefits of distributed energy resources and microgrids to supplement the energy needs of the larger grid. Another factor affecting economic feasibility is the perceived risk by financiers. A microgrid can include fuel cells, solar, storage, demand response technology. Those diverse energy assets introduce complexity to assess the value of the microgrid's portfolio of energy assets. To a financier, complexity increases risks and results in a higher finance cost. Matt?
All aspects of the microgrid development process need to be re-examined holistically. There are elements of New York State law, market rules, including ISO rules, and utility practices that need to be re-examined to make microgrid development a win-win, benefiting customers, the utilities, and developers. At this time, microgrids are seen as impediments instead of assets. This must be changed if we are to move forward with the REV objectives of animating robust distribution-level markets. Developers have identified uncertainty regarding microgrid interconnection approval procedures, which results in increased time and cost. At the same time, utilities must ensure that the system is safe, secure, and reliable. We think that the microgrid interconnection process should be re-examined with the goal of improving efficiency by reducing the associated time and cost and standardizing procedures where it is reasonable to do so.
If you read the press, a microgrid may appear to be a panacea. But the truth is, a microgrid can malfunction. Participants in a microgrid need to be educated about what it takes to operate a stable microgrid, particularly when it operates in isolation from the larger grid. Microgrid infrastructure can have similar vulnerabilities as grid infrastructure. Wires can be cut and areas flooded. Expectations and benefits need to be properly set and achieved.
I'd like to take a moment to thank all of the members of the working group for their attention, patience, and dedication. Without their knowledge and experience, this work would not have been possible. I'd specifically like to thank Mike Reeder and Peggy Neville for their leadership, and the co-conveners of this committee, Tom Mimnaugh, Andrea Serbin, and my fellow panelist, Walter Levesque. Their support and contributions were essential in this effort. Moving forward, staff needs to continue the work of the committee by addressing the regulatory issues I've mentioned. Specifically, we believe an alternative could be developed to the case-by-case exemption process presently required to develop a multi-customer microgrid. Thank you for your attention, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I want to start out with kind of a technical question. On the feasibility on the microgrids, but this goes all the way to solar, the feasibility that when the lights go out in the general grid, the ability for the existing microgrid to safely continue operation. I know originally, the original design was if the system went down, usually these distributed generation sources had to shut down in order to maintain the safety of the system. I understand there may be mechanisms, or there are mechanisms that allow you to maintain the grid, microgrid, while the larger grid is gone. Is that generally accepted? Is it expensive? What's the kind of status of those technologies right now?
Let's take a shot at that. It can be expensive, and standards are in development. And if anyone else would like to add to that.
Technically.
So yeah, I think one size doesn't fit all. The interconnections are going to be different for many different microgrids. There are cases where the generation that's within the microgrid zone isn't capable of supporting all of the load in the zone. The technical implications are that the generation that's attempting to support it when the grid goes down trips. And so those are the technical components. I'll keep it at a very high level. There are controllers and there are schemes that have to be put in place to see. The closer the load is to the generation, the more you'll have the feasibility. NYU is a great example. Matt talked about it. When Sandy was coming in, they matched their load to their generation on the what if. And so when they swapped over, their generation didn't have to see a significant hit. And so one size doesn't fit all, I think, is the easiest way to look at it.
But another way of looking at it, the resiliency during blackouts.
Very good, Gary. Great timing.
So what happens is that fairly quickly it goes dark, but it comes back on again.
Not so easy to come back on, necessarily. And I think that's part of that controller and the makeup of the generation assets. In some cases, they'll need black start generation to support the controller and the environment of bringing other generation back on.
I'm afraid to ask any more questions. I just want to add one thing to it. What he said is, he described New York University, which is a single-user microgrid with multiple facilities. It gets much more complex when you say it's them plus 3 other entities that may or may not be able to alter their schedule in order to match generation and needs. And so it does become more complex.
I saw in your literature that one of the things that you said is that having a microgrid controller, that's one of the technologies that you've identified as sort of evolving as opposed to ready for prime time. Was that what would help?
It would help. The Department of Energy recently had a financial opportunity announcement called 997. And what they're attempting to do is fund 4 to 6 projects to measure the effectiveness of a microgrid controller, both to keep the system stable for multiple user. It's a community microgrid that they're actually trying to test, and also to impact reduce carbon emissions. So it's trying to accomplish both goals, reliability as well as energy sustainability. You guys have a project on that? No?
Any further questions? This group? Okay, well, great. Thank you. And we appreciate all of this. I think, are we done? We're done.
I would just like to echo the chair and Matt's words to thank all the participants, the co-conveners, all the participants in the working group who were the laboring oars that made all this possible. And I wish you all well. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.